What's up, guys? Toad, Better Off Dead, back yet again. And this is going to be college football week 8. Where I feel it's like we're getting to the end of college football already, even though it also feels like college football just started. This is crazy. My college football has not been very good the last 2 years. Unfortunately, I apologize. 2-2 last week, below 500 on the season by a few games. Just not good. Washington State, who, by the way, I will be talking about in a little bit, should not have been on them last week. That was just ridiculous. I mentioned it in one of my videos after it happened, but one of the daily breakdowns, but absolutely the wrong side on that one. Terrible. I was still shocked that Arizona was able to not only show up, but just blow them away like that, coming off that triple overtime game against USC, I think is what it was. That was just insane. And then NC State really just did not show up for Duke, which I was surprised by for sure. I definitely thought that was the right side, the value side. I'm not sure that the handicap was really even wrong in that one. I think in the Washington State one it was. Just what can you do, man? We move on. We move on from that. And we got 4 more plays, and I will talk about a couple more games. Like one that, there's one that was like a very near play for me, and then I can talk about a few other games, just leans that I have, maybe some of the bigger games, the games that are better plays, whatever. And like I said, as I always say, feel free to hit me up, Tower King Toad on Twitter, or you can comment on the YouTube channel, on the videos, whatever. If you want me to talk about some other games that I'm not talking about in these videos, let me know. I might have some opinions on them. Who knows? I can let you know my feelings on some of those. If you value my opinions, even my college football has sucked so bad that maybe you don't, or maybe you want to know so that you can fade me, so you can go against me, because I suck. I've sucked this year now. I don't really suck. I think my analysis is decent. I've been doing it for quite a while. I mean, what can you say, man? Just sometimes you don't. Sometimes you have bad streaks and you don't win. You don't win all the times. The way it is. Let's get into some of the college football games for this week here. All of these are going to be Saturday games throughout the day, starting with a noon slate game in Mississippi State, plus 6.5. Not my favorite game here, but I do like it. What we have with Mississippi State is they are at Arkansas, and you can see the line has gone down. It looked like it opened at 7, so we missed out on the 7. It's 6 or 6.5 at most of the spots. I found 6.5. You can probably still find the 6.5s. Not much of a difference between 6.5 and 6. So either way, but this indicates to me, because the line has gone down a little bit, that there is some money, some more respected money coming in on Mississippi State. I would have to say that is driving that line down. You can see they have 62% of the cash, even though only 51% of the ticket percentage here, according to pregame.com, at least, value the accuracy of these numbers here. Tends to work out for me most of the time, so I do. And this helps me market read these games for sure. So this indicates to me that the money is on Mississippi State. There's that discrepancy there, more of the money than the tickets on Mississippi State. And I think we can kind of determine why that is the case here. If we look at what's going on with Mississippi State and Arkansas with the situation, I like to look at the situations that these teams are in. What did Arkansas do not only the last week, but the last really 4 weeks? You can see their SEC schedule has just been brutal so far this year. They had LSU, where they played competitively, ranked LSU, maybe even underranked at that point there. That's a really tough game. They played that competitively. Then they had Texas A&M, another pretty solid SEC team, at least a competitive team, kind of sandwiched in there. So I kind of talked about that game in one of my other videos, one of the past weeks, where you can kind of explain Arkansas's loss a little bit in that one because it was sandwiched between LSU and Ole Miss, but still tough opponent in Texas A&M. Then they get ranked Ole Miss. Another step-up game. They played fairly competitively in that one after not doing as well in the Texas A&M game. And then last week, they played against Alabama. And it is true that they were getting kind of destroyed in this game to some extent. They were down 24-6 in the second half, but the one thing about this is that Arkansas did not pack it in. They kept playing, so they put in like a pretty full effort in this game, and they got within 3 in the fourth quarter with still 11 minutes left in the game. Basically, I think is what that indicates. Yeah, because you can see that touchdown here is with 33 seconds left in the third quarter. So yeah, this is with 11 minutes left still to go in the game. So this was a 3-point game for quite a while. So that tells me that Arkansas still was playing competitively in this. That was against Alabama, man. Of course, Alabama is one of the name teams always in the SEC. They're usually vying for the championships. That's a big game for Arkansas. They didn't pack it in when they were losing 24-6. They continued that effort, and now they're coming off that game, and they get Mississippi State. And after Mississippi State, well, they have Florida. I mean, Florida is kind of at least a big name team still in the SEC, even if they're not as good sometimes, although they are 5-2 this year, so maybe I wouldn't even say they're down this year, although they've had a little bit of a weaker schedule than some of these other teams have so far. But what can we say about Mississippi State here? What does their schedule look like? Mississippi State, they're coming off a bye. They had a bye, and prior to that, they played Western Michigan after they faced Alabama. So after that tough game, they had kind of an easy game, a cakewalk against Western Michigan that they won, and then they had a bye. So they've had a lot of time off, and they've been able to prepare for this game against Arkansas for a while. So I think you're going to get a focused Mississippi State team here because they haven't really had any big games like surrounding this Arkansas game. They had the extra week to prepare for this Arkansas game. And yeah, it's a decent spot for Mississippi State, and it is not a very good spot for Arkansas, in my opinion. Arkansas coming off that max effort game where they continued that effort late in the game against Alabama there. So that's the first play. I think it's somewhat self-explanatory there. Arkansas is in a tough, hangover type of spot coming off that really big game. Mississippi State, not so. They're coming off the bye. They should be the more rested, more focused team, so I like that there. I like Mississippi State plus 6.5. And the other thing I forgot to mention, because I did mention my losses last week, I did have 2 pretty good wins last week with Pitt as an outright win, and I will be talking about Pitt, this is what kind of reminded me of Pitt, because I'm about to talk about them again. I was on them last week. Nice, big money line cash as like an 8.5 point dog at home. They won outright against Louisville. They're actually losing the game, I think 21-7 in the second half, and wound up scoring 17 unanswered, I think, to win that, 20 unanswered or 21 unanswered, I guess, to win that game, whatever it was, 38-21 at the end. I'm on no sleep here, man. I'm kind of losing my mind trying to remember it. But we won on Pitt there, won on Georgia State, even though Georgia State kind of let their lead against Marshall slip. But they were able to do it. They were able to retake control of that game after they let a big lead slip to 3, and then they padded the lead again and got it back up to a nice big 3-score lead or whatever. So that was a nice win that was fairly easy for Georgia State there. And Pitt, the one thing I forgot to mention about Pitt in that game last week is that Pitt, they also I did mention they had the extra week to prepare. So speaking of Mississippi State coming out of a bye here, Pitt was coming out of a bye last week, and that was helpful. And Pitt also, it was more helpful to them, I think, because Pitt had a situation where they didn't really know who their quarterback was going to be. So they were going to be starting quarterback who I think they hadn't started yet. Like a backup quarterback was coming into like the starting quarterback role. So they had extra time to get used to him, get him used to the offense, prepare with him too. So all of that extra preparation in that situation was really good for Pitt. So I figured I would point that out. Speaking of Pitt, well, we were on them last week in that nice spot, a bad spot for Louisville, good spot for Pitt. Well, what happens when you go, in football, you go on like a week-to-week basis. What can you have here? You can have a team that's in a really good spot one week, and you can have them in a really bad spot the next week. And I think that's what we got here. With what Pitt is up against here, I'm taking Wake Forest -1 at home. Arguably, like, it almost looks too easy to take Wake Forest at home. But what we have with Wake here, And actually, I don't really like what the market, or no, actually, the market read. I was gonna say I didn't like what the market read looked like, or no, I still don't actually. Where it looks like Wake has 72% of the tickets and only 63% of the cash. I'm actually not buying it here. I don't see any reason why um, Pitt should really be getting like more of the respected money than Wake is here. And this is an afternoon slate, Saturday game as well. And what do we have going on here? Well, just as I was on Pitt last week, I think there are numerous reasons to go against Pitt in this one. And you see Pitt, they're coming off that big win over Louisville, man. That was, and we explained it all last week. Louisville, they were in a terrible spot coming off a huge win over Notre Dame. That was a big, big win. So this was a letdown spot, hangover spot for Louisville coming into this game. And you can see here that Louisville also had 3 turnovers in the game. So they did actually outgain Pitt, really actually outplayed them kind of, even though some of it might have been after they fell behind. But those 3 turnovers really did them in. So this is going to make Pitt look better. I'm not saying that my handicap was wrong. I don't really want to say that. Pitt did get the cover pretty easily in the outright win, but those turnovers definitely helped the situation for them, and that's going to make Pitt probably look better than they actually are. And so Pitt is coming off that game, big win over ranked Louisville, a game that looks really good, makes them look really good, and this is a sandwich for Pitt because they have Notre Dame up next after this, and then Florida State after that. So 2 more ranked opponents, big games after this. And in between the two, they have Wake Forest. Like, are they really going to be paying attention to Wake Forest in a situation like that? They just got that huge win. They might still be riding that high off that huge win, and they have that extra look ahead potentially to playing Notre Dame the week after that, who's always a big name team, and even Florida State after that. Big name teams, ranked teams, big games there. They might look right past Wake Forest here. And what has Wake Forest done recently? Wake Forest, I'm shocked that you actually see like 72% of the tickets on Wake, because like who's going to want, I'm not sure I buy those numbers, because who's going to want Wake at all after what they just did? They just lost to Virginia Tech 30-13. And this is a Virginia Tech team that I keep saying is not very good at all. They're down this year. They're quite down, even though they're 3-4 and 2-1 in conference. I think they've had pretty easy schedule. I mean, those 2 wins are against these 2 teams, Wake and Pitt. So I don't know how much stock you can put into those wins. And for Wake, I believe, do they have a bye as well? Let me see. I mean, they're coming off that really ugly loss. No, they did not have a bye, but they're coming off that really ugly loss against Virginia Tech. And you can kind of explain the Virginia Tech loss, though, because the game before that, they were a huge underdog, like a 21-point underdog at Clemson, and they played that game pretty tough, and they only lost that game by 5 against a team that was a big favorite against them, a team that's usually a much better team, a really good team, like a name team in Clemson. That's a big game for Wake Forest. So they were probably in a hangover spot, and it was their second straight road game, back-to-back road games. That's a tough spot for them to be in against Virginia Tech. So I think you can explain them not playing well against Virginia Tech in a game like that, in a spot like that. That kind of explains why Wake Forest didn't do well in that game. And Pitt, of course, they did also lose to Virginia Tech, although their loss was a little bit. It was not quite as ugly looking as the as Wake's was to Virginia Tech. So people might look at that and do kind of that syllogism thing as well, where they look at the common opponents and be like, "Oh, Pitt lost to Virginia Tech 38-21, but Wake Forest lost to them whatever it was, 38-13, 31-13, whatever it was. So that looks worse." So my thought is that people are going to look at all that and really not want anything to do with Wake. They're going to see that Pitt just had that nice win against ranked Louisville, coming off that huge win against Louisville. Wake just couldn't possibly look worse against Virginia Tech there with that really horrendous, ugly loss. They're 0-3 in conference. Who's really going to want Wake here? I don't buy what I'm seeing in the on the pregame board there with what the market looks like. I expect those numbers will probably kind of shift here because Pitt is in a really bad spot. They're in that hangover spot. They're in a sandwich spot. And Wake is in a spot that's like a bounce back spot, coming off a pretty embarrassing looking loss, a really ugly loss. So that's what we got going on there. I like Wake quite a bit, and they're only laying 1 at home, so it's really just pick the winner there. I like it. I like Wake there. Pitt, the one thing they do have is they have a better defense than Wake does, although I think Wake can certainly score more easily than Pitt can. Pitt's offense is a pretty big question mark, even though they scored a decent amount last week. I still think it's a question mark. They got the new quarterback there, and Wake only laying the -1. Typically, I'll tend to side with the better defense. With just in a vacuum, all other things thrown out the window, I'd like to take the better defense. But here, just it's as I explained, it's just a terrible situation for Pitt and a much better situation for Wake. And Wake at least has the better offense than Pitt, so I like Wake. I'm not concerned with Pitt having the better defense. Everything else points against Pitt there, the situation especially. Wake Forest -1. Moving on, these next two are going to be huge underdogs, and I do like to say I don't like to take really huge underdogs typically because the big favorite tends to be so much better than the other team that they can actually kind of dictate the score in a lot of those cases, and I kind of don't like that, but I have been on a few of these this year, and I'm going to be on 2 of them here, and I think the situation is just too good to pass up, and these are actually going to be both of these games are going to be the opposite sides of one specific game last week, one of the biggest games of last week that everybody saw. And the first one I'm looking at here is Washington State +20. And what do we got going on with Washington State here? If you look at the market read here, I think both of these are actually next to each other, so I can just stay on the page on these two. Hey, all right. You got Oregon. They're actually up to 20 from 19.5, it looks like, but they got 82% of the tickets and 69% of the cash, so that tells me that more of the tickets than the money, so more of the respected money is not on their side and is going against them on Washington State. And why is that going to be the case? Well, Washington State, man, why would I even want to be on them after what happened last week? Well, some of this is a play against Oregon. So Oregon just suffered their first loss of the season in their biggest game of the season, basically. That's why I'm going against them here. They're coming off a huge game against Washington, close game that went to the wire, really big game. That was like the game of the week pretty much. They come off that. They come home, they have to play Washington State, and then right after that, they have to turn right back around and play Utah, another one of the top teams in the conference, another ranked team. So this is a sandwich spot, for Oregon. And with Oregon suffering their first loss, I won't say it's a dream crusher, but it is going to make life hard for them now that they have one loss, and they still have to contend with USC and Washington, who they just lost to, who both are still undefeated in the conference now. Oregon is definitely a big setback. That definitely set them a bit back. So I won't say it's a dream crusher because they're not completely out of it, but definitely a big setback, and they're coming off not only a huge loss, but their first loss of the season. And sometimes you can see a team like lose the game twice, for lack of a better term. When something like that happens, you're cruising along like that, and then you run into a really good team. You have that step-up game, that huge performance, huge effort game. You lose that game, and now a lot of people, I think, are going to expect, well, Oregon is still the better team. They're certainly going to bounce back against Washington State, and they are a huge favorite against Washington State. But I think Oregon could be suffering that hangover effect, and they could even be looking forward to Utah here because it's the sandwich spot here. They might look a little bit past Washington State. And what have we seen from Washington State? Washington State was ranked. They beat Wisconsin, who was ranked at the time that they beat them, although Wisconsin has shown that they're maybe not quite as good as we thought they were coming into the season. They beat Oregon State, who is definitely a good team and one of the top teams in the conference. That was a big win for Washington State. Then they wound up losing to UCLA. And then last week, unfortunately, I was on Washington State because I thought Arizona was in a really bad spot with that triple overtime 2-point loss to USC. I was wondering how it would be possible that Arizona would be able to turn around and get back up for a game after that, and I was completely wrong. Arizona really showed up, and they blew the doors off of Washington State. After that, Washington State, they were ranked as well. Now they've completely fallen out of the rankings, so that could mean that like Oregon might pay less attention. Like this Washington State team, we're seeing who they really are now. Like they just got crushed. They're out of the rankings now. They're not a great team. They're only 1-2 in conference now, we don't have to pay much attention to them. I think that might be the feeling there that's going to make it so that the public bettors, the recreational bettors, are probably not going to want anything to do with Washington State. Unfortunately, I took that really ugly loss on them. But when you have an ugly loss like that, I think that tends to refocus you, man. And they're, of course, they have a huge name team, a huge team, one of the best teams in the conference coming in, their biggest game of the season, really, coming in to play them at home. And I think it's a step-up game for Washington State. I think they're going to want to turn it around after that totally embarrassing loss. They're in a good spot to turn it back around, whereas Oregon is in a spot where they're coming off a huge, huge game, and they might be in that, like, hangover spot there. So Oregon in, like, the tough spot whereas Washington State is in, I think, a much better spot to come out focused here, man. So I like Washington State plus all the points. I think we're getting a benefit in the number here. I think the number is a bit bigger than it should be, of course, here. Coming into the season, I think this line would have been a little bit less than it is right now, maybe somewhere in like the 17 ballpark. I don't know. I haven't really looked at the look-ahead numbers here, but I think it would have been a little bit shorter than what it is now. I like it. I like how this spot comes together here. I like Washington State getting the 20 points. That's going to be that play. And finally, the biggest dog that we have here. And unfortunately, I think I missed out on even getting a 28 on this one. This says it was 27.5, and it's gone down to 26.5 in a lot of places on Arizona State or on Washington being the favorite here. Although I think it was 28 at some spots. Probably not going to get back to 28. There are 27.5s out there at a couple of spots, which is how I got a 27.5. I'd still probably be okay with the 26.5, or the 27 would definitely be better because 27 is still kind of a somewhat key number a little bit. Once you get into numbers that are that big, the numbers aren't really as key anymore. 28 definitely is more key than 27, I would say, but either one of those, get the best number that you can here. I would still be okay with taking Arizona State plus the 26.5 as well. And you can see here, it looks like this is a reverse line movement game here. You see the line come down on Washington, with 63% of the tickets on Washington, but 63% of the money on the other side on Arizona State. So it looks like it's pros versus Joes. Looks like there's line movement going against where the ticket percentage is, and the higher money percentage is also going against it. I think there are professional guys on Arizona State here, and why is that the case? Well, we kind of just alluded to this. We kind of just talked about it. Where Washington, they're also coming off that huge game against Oregon, and that was their statement game, man. That was like their legitimizing game where Washington faced Oregon, who Oregon has kind of had the upper hand against them in this conference recently. That was a battle between two highly ranked teams, two of the three best teams in the conference, probably with USC thrown in there as well. Huge win for Washington, big effort game, close game. They wound up winning the game by 3. Now they come off of that, and they stay at home, which might actually make the situation kind of less good for Washington in a way, because they're staying at home. They're celebrating, kind of reading the press clippings, hearing from, all the fans, staying at home, getting to hear all that, bask in that win while they're still at home, celebrating that win. I don't know that they're going to be totally prepared for an Arizona State team who everybody kind of sees as a mess. They're the dregs of the conference, still haven't won in conference. They're 1-5. Overall, and they have that self-imposed bowl ban, which I've talked about in some of my other videos. But Arizona State, possibly because they have the self-imposed bowl ban, that could potentially focus them more during the season, because you get games like this. These are like your big games. These are kind of like your bowl games, or you're not going to have a bowl game. This is kind of it for Arizona State. They get to face the number 5 ranked team in the country now, undefeated team. That's going to be a game where I think Arizona State probably should come prepared and should show up. And Arizona State, they're coming off a game against Colorado, which I talked about that. I believe I talked about it in one of my previous videos. They're also coming off a bye. So they had that game against Colorado. These games were all somewhat competitive here, although not really against good teams necessarily. USC, pretty respectable, only losing to USC by 14. And that was like their one other like really big opponent. They were within 20 of USC, obviously, let's say, in that game. So they are able to still remain somewhat competitive in these games, even though they're losing the games outright. But they have a bye as well here off of that Colorado game, which is kind of a big game where Colorado, as I keep saying, they're weaker than we thought they were. Certainly, they've proven that they're not living up to that early season hype just because they beat TCU. They shouldn't have been overly hyped the way that they were. But that was a big game for Arizona State, nonetheless, facing that hyped Colorado team. Coming out of that, another loss, that losing streak, they get a bye to reset, refocus, and the extra week to focus on another big opponent here against Washington. I think that sets up nicely for Arizona State. Coming out of the bye, they have that extra week to prepare. So all these situational plays, man, that I'm talking about this week here, these four, you get teams that are in really bad spots against teams that are in much better situational spots. And again, that's the case here. Extra rest, extra preparation for Arizona State versus Washington, who's coming off that monster win, one of the biggest wins that the program has had, probably, at least recently. And like nobody's really going to want Arizona State here. Nobody's really been paying attention. And like I said, everybody just thinks they're a mess. They have that self-imposed bowl ban. Nobody really cares about Arizona State. Washington looks like the class of the conference. They're a high-scoring team, which everybody likes that as well. The recreational bettors love to bet on those high-scoring teams. They love that. And Michael Penix, I keep mentioning him. He's like in his 6th year in college now. He's having one of his best years, probably his best year. He's just slinging it around. Nobody's going to want anything to do with Arizona State here, but I do, and they're getting a boatload of points here, a 4-score spread, basically. 4-score and 20 years, man. Whatever it is. I don't even know what the quote is. I'm losing my mind. 4-score and 8 years ago. I don't even know what the quote is anymore. Who gives a shit? I'm losing my mind. Arizona State plus 27.5. Let's do it. And what else do we got on the board here? Let me see here. There was one other game that I was really close to being on, which is this Missouri-South Carolina game. Well, actually, first, let's just recap quickly. Wow, I'm out of it tonight. The 4 plays that I have are going to be Mississippi State plus 6.5, Saturday, a noon slate game. Saturday afternoon, Wake Forest -1, and Saturday evening, Washington State plus 20, and Arizona State plus 27.5. Those are the officially endorsed Toad plays. Let's go. And now talking about these extra games here, just leans potentially. I was very close to adding South Carolina to my card here because with Missouri, it does look like the market's kind of against that, though. It looks like Missouri's gone up to 7. They got 82% of the cash, but 78% of the tickets. Still like a public team, though. And what have we seen out of Missouri recently? They're coming off another like pretty big win. They were just coming off that, or pretty big game, I should say. They were just coming off that LSU game, which I don't want to talk about, where Missouri absolutely should have covered in that game and threw a pick 6 right at the end to throw the cover away. And that was the only way they weren't going to cover at that point. They had been winning that game outright in the 4th quarter. So that was a big game for Missouri, which made me hesitant to want to do anything with Missouri last week. They were coming off that kind of like gut-wrenching loss against LSU, but they came and showed up again last week. Big game against Kentucky. They were able to beat Kentucky, and that looks like a really good win there too. Now coming off that game, now Missouri gets South Carolina, who Missouri's coming off those back-to-back big wins, and they have Georgia. They have a bye, and then they have Georgia and Tennessee up after that. So this looks like a sandwich to me for Missouri as well. Coming off back-to-back ranked opponents, big games, big win over Kentucky. South Carolina just kind of sandwiched in there. And then after the bye, they got number 1 Georgia and then Tennessee after that. So they might look right past South Carolina here. Big win coming off the win against Kentucky. And then South Carolina, they had a win. I mean, South Carolina, one of the other slight reasons why I might hesitate on this one and why it didn't quite make my card is that not just looking at the market looks a little weird on it, but South Carolina, coming off Tennessee and then Florida, those are also still like kind of big games as well. But that Florida game, that's the way they lost that game, man. Florida, I mean, it is still a big game. They're a big name team. They are a team with a winning record, so that just makes me a little bit hesitant thinking that that was still a big game for South Carolina. And with the way that they lost, South Carolina, I think, was winning by 14 late in the game. They blew the whole thing and wound up losing by 2. So that's a game where it's like it could go kind of either way. Like, can they get up off the mat after losing a game like that? How much stock do they put into a game against Florida? Florida, like I said, still a pretty big name team, but then Missouri, they are kind of a big name team at this point as well. They are a ranked team, so it is possible that South Carolina will still show up focused here and come in focused against this Missouri team. Missouri, they've been in and out of the rankings. I think they were in the rankings, and then they dropped out of it once they lost to LSU, I think, and now they're back in the rankings again, ranked a little bit higher than they were previously. I think they were 21, maybe, somewhere in the 20s previously. Now they're ranked 20, so that kind of puts a target on their back. So all things considered, yeah, I think Missouri is in such a bad spot here that South Carolina's spot is less bad, and I would only lean to South Carolina in that one. You can get 7 points there. So that's the way I would look in that one. What else we got? There are a couple of big games. There is Ohio State against Penn State. Looks like that number's gone down from 5.5 to 5 on Ohio State at home. Looks like a little bit of a short line for Ohio State, even though Penn State has been pretty good as well this year. I don't know that bettors are going to think that this is going to be like a competitive game and want to like take the points with Penn State, or if they're going to think that the line looks a little too short on Ohio State. I think it could go both ways. And here you can see 70% of the tickets are on Penn State, which does mean that they are kind of the public underdog there, but they have 81% of the cash, it looks like right now, which also tells me that some of the bigger money might kind of be on Penn State as well. I don't really quite know how to read that game. That's a tough game to read there. That could go either way. This very, very slight lean would be to Penn State there, but I really don't have a strong feeling on that at all. And then you got Alabama, Tennessee, one of the other big games this week. Alabama, I mean, this is a big game for both teams as well. Alabama is coming off a game against Arkansas, which is the game that I talked about in the Mississippi State game, where Alabama was winning that game by more, and then Arkansas hung around and made it close at the end, where I'm playing against Arkansas because I think they did put in the full effort there. Alabama may have taken their foot off the gas a little bit when they were ahead 24-6 late in that game, but I don't know, man, because there are things that could point me in both directions here. Like Alabama might have looked worse than they actually are against that Arkansas team. Alabama still this year, it looks like they're not quite the Alabama that we're used to seeing most years. They're not quite that like completely dominant team that is just completely unbeatable. But Alabama does have revenge from last year. They lost to Tennessee last year, and they're going to remember that. A team like Alabama, even though revenge, I don't know if I put that much stock into it. I think they do have this game circled because of it, because that was like, when you're Alabama, you only lose like 1 or 2 games a year. You remember those losses, and they certainly are going to remember that loss against Tennessee and the way they lost it. I think they lost it on like a field goal that like bounced off the goalpost or something and went through. It was some crazy ending. Very high-scoring game, too. I think it was 51-48 final or something like that. So they will remember that. So I think Alabama will come motivated here. But Tennessee, I think, is also going to show up motivated here, and they have kind of looked lackluster, I think, in some of their recent games too. I think they come off a game against Texas A&M, even though Texas A&M, fairly good opponent. Tennessee didn't do that well against them, but people will look and say that Alabama played Texas A&M the week before that, and they also didn't do that well against Texas A&M. Tennessee actually, I think, beat them by 1 or 2 more points than Alabama did. So I don't know what to really take away from those outcomes, but Texas A&M would have been in like, I thought, kind of a bad spot because they were coming off the Alabama game, having to play Tennessee last week, but Tennessee is still a team you're probably going to get up for as well. So I don't really know what to think about this whole situation here. In Tennessee, I believe they're like more of a passing offense, but Alabama one of the things they're able to do is stop the pass defensively. And on the market here, you can see Alabama's got 57% of both the tickets and the cash, it looks like here. But it looks like the money's gone down from 9.5, or the line has gone down from 9.5 to 8. So I don't know. I think Tennessee, I mean, it looks like Tennessee's getting some of the action there. So I don't know which way I would even tend to favor here as well. I don't know. Maybe the slight lean, just because of the way the market's looking right now, would be to Tennessee. But I think the situation is a little bit better for Alabama. So I don't know what to think about a game like that either. I don't know. I don't know if there's anything else. Maybe if I see anything else on the board, if I think of anything else, I will potentially talk about it in one of the videos that I do maybe Saturday morning or something if I see anything else, because there might be a few other things to look at here. Like Wisconsin, Illinois, that looks kind of like a trap line to me. The line has gone down from 4.5 to 2.5, even though Wisconsin has 64% of the tickets and 62% of the cash, so a little bit less of the cash. That's like kind of reverse line movement that I tend to look at there. So it looks like there is bigger money coming in on Wisconsin. And I think Wisconsin, they look like they've kind of like righted the ship a little bit there. People are going to want to look maybe to Wisconsin. Although didn't they lose? I don't know. They might have lost their last game. I don't even know, man. I don't know what to think about Wisconsin at this point, but they're kind of the bigger name team, and Illinois has just kind of looked like a mess this year. So this does look like a trap to me. It looks too easy to take Wisconsin there. And the other thing I will say in the Tennessee-Alabama game, the total has gone down from like 49 and a half down to like 48 and a half. So I think the under might be the way to play that game, because it's a big game between these two teams. So you might see they might be focused and come out and play like tough defense, even though both of those teams have kind of played lower scoring games this year. People might look and see that 51-48 final last year and still kind of think, I mean, the public does just have generally a tendency to try to play overs anyway. So I don't know. The under might be the way to play the Alabama Tennessee game there. Anyway, yeah, I think that's probably all I got to say here. If I have anything else, I might talk about it in some of my other videos when I do the daily videos. This has been my longest video to date, and this is just, I am so out of it. I didn't even get that Gettysburg Address quote right. I don't know what I'm even talking about at this point. I am Toad, Tower Gang Toad on Twitter. I'm pretty much already dead, and I'm better off for being so. I'm better off dead. You can find me on the Tower Gang podcast. We just did another podcast tonight. We are the most offensive podcast on the planet. We are on YouTube, Odyssey, Rumble. We have a link tree, towergangpod.com. You can find all the links. Spotify, I haven't mentioned that as well. And you can support us on Locals, towergang.locals.com. Throw us a little bit of money. And I think that's going to do it. I am Toad. I am better off dead, and I am already dead. Peace.